So, in 1950, the world's highest court had to solve a mystery that sounds more like a riddle. What happens when a territory's legal guardian just vanishes? We're about to explore a landmark case that tried to answer that exact question. I mean, really think about that for a second. You have a territory. It's not quite a colony, but it's not yet its own country either. And its whole future is tied to an organization that just doesn't exist anymore. It's a huge legal puzzle, and solving it had massive consequences for the people living there, and really for the future of international law itself. And this wasn't just some theoretical debate. This letter right here, dated December 19th, 1949, is the real deal. It's the official request from the brand new United Nations to the International Court of Justice, asking them to weigh in on the future of a very real place, the territory of Southwest Africa. So this brings us to this territory, stuck in a state of, well, legal limbo. Its guardian, the League of Nations, had dissolved after World War II. It was gone. But Southwest Africa, the place it was meant to protect, was still there. This left this huge, critical question just hanging in the air. Who was responsible now? Okay, to really get what's going on, we have to rewind a bit, back to the end of World War I. This is where this whole unique idea of an international duty, what they called a mandate, actually comes from. Right, so the road to this crisis was paved over decades. Before World War I, this place was a German colony. After the war, Germany had to give up its claim. Then, in 1920, the new League of Nations set up this mandate system to look after it. But the real kicker comes in 1946, when the League of Nations itself just disappears, creating this total legal vacuum. At the very heart of all this was the mandate, and it wasn't just about who was in charge. The language they used was a sacred trust of civilization. The whole idea was that more developed nations had a duty to look out for the well-being of the people in these territories, all under the watchful eye of the League of Nations. And the country that was handed this sacred trust for Southwest Africa was its next-door neighbor, the Union of South Africa. They were supposed to administer the territory like it was part of their own country. But, and this is super important, they were only doing it on behalf of the League of Nations. So, fast forward, and here we are at the standoff. The League of Nations is history, but the new United Nations has risen from the ashes to take its place. And almost immediately, South Africa and the UN had completely different ideas about what this meant for Southwest Africa. The two sides were just miles apart. South Africa was basically saying, hey, the League is gone, so the mandate is gone. We should be allowed to just make this territory part of our country. But the UN pushed back hard, arguing that the obligation, that sacred trust, was still very much alive, and that the UN had simply stepped into the League's shoes as the supervisor. You know, this wasn't just some argument between two parties. These documents from the court's own files show that countries from all over the world, like the Philippines and Poland, were sending in their own legal opinions. What started as a regional problem had blown up into a huge global debate about how the world was supposed to be run. All right, so after hearing from everybody, the International Court of Justice was finally ready to give its answer. And on July 11th, 1950, the judges delivered their opinion. It was a huge moment, one that would really shape international law for decades to come. The court's ruling was pretty nuanced. It had 5 main parts. First, they said the mandate is still a thing. It didn't just die with the League. Second, that means South Africa's duties also continue, but now under the UN's watch. Third, the UN's new trusteeship system was the logical path forward. But, and this was a big but, the court said South Africa wasn't legally forced to join that system. And finally, in a unanimous decision, they ruled South Africa couldn't just change the territory's status all by itself. On that point, the vote was overwhelming, 12-2. The court made it crystal clear that South Africa's duties, things like sending in reports and passing on petitions from the people living there, were all still in effect. The supervisor had changed from the League to the UN, but the act of supervision itself was absolutely not up for debate. But on the really tricky question, the court was much more divided, voting 8-6. They basically agreed that the UN's trusteeship system was what everyone intended to happen next, but they couldn't find a specific legal rule in the UN Charter that compelled South Africa to do it. The court was very careful to say they were ruling on the law, not on what was politically or morally right. This quote from the court's summary really says it all. The power to change the territory's status rested with the Union acting in agreement with the UN. That was the final word, and it was unanimous. It meant South Africa could not go it alone. Taking over the territory was officially off the table.
So why are we talking about a court case from 1950? Why does it still matter? Because this ruling set an incredibly important precedent. This wasn't just about one piece of land in Africa. It was about whether international promises hold up in a world that's always changing. The legacy here is huge. It established that international duties don't just vanish when an organization dissolves. It basically cemented the UN as the legal successor to the League. And most importantly, it drove home the idea that the sacred trust, the well-being of people, was the ultimate point, and that responsibility doesn't just expire. This became a critical legal cornerstone for the whole era of decolonization that came next. And that kind of brings us to our final thought here. The court's decision back in 1950 offered one possible answer to a question that feels just as urgent today. When institutions crumble and global powers change, who's left to stand up for the rights and the futures of people who don't have a powerful voice on the world stage?